Hey again, travel bosses. I'm excited to bring you this week's sponsor, TripStreak, the smarter travel search. What I love about TripStreak is the ability to set your personal preferences to either have or avoid red-eye flights or have things like completely lie flat seats. So the next time you need to book a flight, check out tripstreak.com/travel-like-a-boss.
Welcome to the Travel Like a Boss podcast, the radio show all about traveling like a boss by being your own boss. Stay tuned for weekly interviews featuring guests that have built their own online businesses. If you would like to have access to our entire back catalog, visit travellikeabosspodcast.com for instant access. And here's your host, Johnny SD.
Hey guys, it's Johnny and welcome to episode 174 of the Travel Like a Boss podcast. I'm here with Brian David Crane.
Hey Johnny, I'm good. How are you doing?
Doing amazing. So Brian is the founder of CallerSmart, and you've had a couple of big successful exits with startups as well, but you've also been traveling for quite a few years, right?
Yeah, I've been nomadic since 2014. But yeah, I sold my first company at 24 and set out to do a around the world trip at 25 called 25 at 25, and I wound up canceling it 3 countries in. I actually didn't enjoy it at the time. It's something we can talk about later in the podcast, but the moral of that story was I had no money coming in. I had an exit, but didn't have any cash flow coming in. I was just living off savings, and it was driving me nuts.
I know exactly what you mean by that. I'm reading a description about you. So you were a self-made millionaire by the time you're 30, and you've been traveling for a few years ever since. And actually, you are in Poland right now traveling.
That's correct. Yeah. Yeah.
Very cool.
Our software team is in Poland, so I've been here since the beginning of August.
Okay. Very cool.
Yeah.
So I definitely want to talk about what it's like being kind of a startup founder / digital nomad / entrepreneur / traveler. But let's do a very quick backstory on how did you actually get started with all this? How did you make that first million?
Yeah. Like I said, I had a recycling company in college, sold it, started the trip around the world, canceled that trip. In the 2008 financial crisis, I went belly up and wound up moving out to Silicon Valley, thanks to a friend of mine, kind of near where you were born, from what I read on your bio about being from San Francisco. Mm-hmm. So I was in Palo Alto for 3 years, and I had the chance to work underneath 3 pretty phenomenal mentors who taught me how to build and scale businesses online. And so to date, my digital marketing agency's done 5 of those companies, launched 5 different multi-million-dollar brands, and probably the biggest one was a brand called archives.com that was bought by ancestry.com for $100 million 2 years after launch. It's in the genealogy space. So
that's awesome. That's amazing. And you are only the second.
That was not my company. Let me be clear on that. Like okay. I was part of the team. Like I want to be part of the team that helped launch that. So
very cool. Well, I hope you got a nice chunk of that at least.
I was well compensated. Yeah. And it was fun too. You learn a lot.
Very cool. So you said that you were traveling, but you were just living off of savings. Can I ask, did you have over $1 million in savings at that time?
No. Like I had, no. But I mean, I was 24, right? To go back in the story, I mean, I had 6 figures saved up, but it was also, it was just going backwards, right? And I was near where you were, in Ukraine. I was actually in Romania at the time, and I packed up and went home. Packed up and went back to the States.
It's a crazy feeling because I remember when I first started traveling, I had let's say $4,000 from selling my car and traveling. I thought that was all the money in the world, and I didn't worry at all about that going down because I think it was a small enough number where I figured, okay, if I lose it all, if I spend it all, I'll just go back and get another job and I can save it back up. But when you have a bigger amount, over 6 figures, and you see that dropping in. I don't know if it's because we know how hard it is to make that amount of money, but just any time it drops, even though we still have, plenty to live off of, it just feels different.
You're right. The way I would describe it, I mean, you're right. The way I would describe it is a guy I know calls it the stripper effect. And what it is that if you, as a girl, if you're a dancer, you start making a lot of money, all of a sudden it's very hard to go back to working a job where you're making $6 or $7 an hour, right? Like all of a sudden your expectations are higher. And so it's a cost of when your income or what you have saved up goes up is that your expectations also go up.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I guess, even as a guy, if you were a male dancer or whatever it was, I mean, if you're used to having, $300 to $1,000 nights, especially in cash, and then all of a sudden you have to go, and even if you get a good job and you're making, let's say $20 an hour, it still just feels different. You're like, well, why would I do this? Why don't I go back to doing something else? Yeah. And even if you can't do it anymore, even if that industry is no longer around, or even if you've, I guess expired from it, I hate to put it in those terms, but it just makes you feel like, well, it almost makes it so you're not willing to work as, I don't want to say as hard anymore, but at least for that amount.
You want to be like, you want the shortcut, I think is what tends to be, is like, how do I get there as fast as possible?
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. And so the only other guest we've had on the show that, has sold a company for $100 million was Sam Marks. That was episode 105. And for, a couple of years after his big exit, where he got, I don't know exactly how much, but let's say between $10 and $20 million for his share, that's enough for him to travel, forever.
Yeah.
But the fact that he said he would only see his count drop, and even if it was only dropping by a few $1,000s a month, he just felt like
he was going backwards.
Yeah. And he just couldn't do it.
I mean, you I know you're a fan of Robert Kiyosaki's work and Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And it's like, it's a doodad, right? Going backwards. It's not an asset. It's not paying you. It's like, it's a doodad. No matter how you phrase it, you have as much money as you want, still a doodad. It's going backwards.
I think that is why I took 6 months off. So about 6 months ago, I guess officially retired, or unofficially retired, and I enjoyed it for a few months. And as of probably 4 or 5 months into it, not only did I get bored, but I also just felt like I was, I don't want to say a loser, but I felt like I wasn't contributing or building anything or doing anything. But
that cuts to I think it's a deep philosophical question and it's one that I think is unanswered for a lot of people, is like, what is the purpose? What is the purpose of life? And a lot of times is it like, are you optimizing for pleasure? Because you can have the 6 months off, or are you optimizing for, like, let's say, to be the best version, or to be the best, let's say, like, right. Nobody asks Steph Curry or LeBron James, like, if they're happy because they're out there pursuing championships, trying to be the best that they can be. They have an off season, they have a downtime, they have the 6 months off. It's not 6 months in the case of the NBA, but they have a couple months off and then they get back to work, right?
Yeah. And so do you feel like as a startup founder or as an entrepreneur, you follow that schedule, or are you just working all the time?
In my case, I work quite a bit. I think like you do. I mean, I was reading where you do the 6 months off, but then when you go back into, we'll call it grind mode, you're doing 40 to 50 hours a week.
Yes, exactly. And normally for me, it's 2 or 3 months on, 2 or 3 months off. Yeah.
So I like working personally. I like what I'm doing, and I like working. So it's more, on a day-to-day basis, it's finding balance. So for instance, like today, I started my work day at about 9:30, worked till 1, went to the gym, had a lunch, like a nice lunch outside before coming in to do this interview with you. And then when we get off the phone, I'll work for probably another 2 to 3 hours. And I've got a couple calls in the evening with folks back in the States. So that's balance to me, right?
So what's funny is we are just one country away. You're in Poland, I'm in Ukraine. And today, so far, we've pretty much done the exact same thing.
Small world. Small world. And I would say, to make the world even smaller, is that before coming to Europe, I was in Southeast Asia. I have a villa in Bali. I know you're a fan of Thailand, but were you in Thailand before coming to Ukraine, or am I misreading things?
I was actually in Bali.
Oh, you were in Bali.
Where in Bali do you have your villa?
In Ubud.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ubud, I like it. I almost feels like a hippier version of Chiang Mai.
Yeah.
But I think for me getting things done, I still prefer Chiang Mai.
Well, Chiang Mai is more digital nomad. Ubud's more new age, I think.
Yeah, so I actually saw the talk you did at Ubud about digital nomads, or kind of the pros and cons. Yeah, the downsides of digital nomads. And it wasn't all the downsides. It was, kind of the pros and cons, and kind of the ways to navigate being a digital nomad. Yeah. And I noticed just from the questions in the audience, I don't know, what everyone was doing there, but I mean, what they were building, because most people, not everyone answered, but it didn't seem like most people were grinding and, trying to build a big business. People were just, there as like life coaches or doing whatever they're doing.
Yes. Yeah. Did you run into that in Chiang Mai as well?
In Chiang Mai, not as much. There is, Chiang Mai, it's funny that Chiang Mai has a bit of a hippie reputation because there's a big, like, vegan fruitarian festival that goes there for a few months of the year. Lots of people are into like acro yoga, and there's Pai, which is kind of like a little hippie village. But in general, even when I hang out with that crowd, which is actually a lot more integrated now with the digital nomad scene than it used to be, a lot of them are, I don't want to say they're definitely not, focused on just like entrepreneurship, but a lot of them are focused on kind of a blend of the two, where they want to create, sustainable products. They want to, create, like, let's say a bamboo, sunglass brand, or like a sustainable yoga mat brand, but they're still building something, and they're still building a real genuine product. And, I'm all for that, whether, whatever it is. In Bali, it seemed more like people just wanted to be a health coach or a life coach without actually doing, creating an actual product or even doing anything successful first.
I think interesting distinction. So in Chiang Mai, it would be that they're doing something tangible. Like at the end of the day, they'd be like, they have a product that they can point to you to, and in Bali, it would be more, let's call it the inner work. It would be from a life coach or from a business coaching standpoint. Is that fair?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean that's one of the downsides in that talk that I mentioned, was that it's hard, especially in the co-working spaces, when you meet someone to find out two things. Number one is that, like, is the interest in you genuine? Is it friendship? Is it business? Are they viewing you as a client, as a potential customer? And there's a lot of mixed motives. And I actually, when I'm in Bali, I don't work from a co-working space. And a lot of times that was because it took a long time. It takes quite a bit of effort to filter out what people's intentions are. And I just wasn't getting much done. So, and that's different than I was reading about your experience in Ukraine, trying to find a new co-working space. Like, one of the things, I was talking with a friend of mine about this recently, that in some of the higher priced locations, it's actually quite nice. And that I think is an opportunity for a co-working space, is that they filter. You have to apply to be in the co-working space. So it's a curated space. It's not just anybody who has the money to get in. They actually, you have to have a product that lines up with something, and that you go through an interview process, and they want to see that, you have a business that's doing X, Y, Z. And so when you're in the space, and I was in one in New York, that is a co-working space plus an incubator. Like, I met some really high quality entrepreneurs through that space, and that partially it's due to the fact it was in New York, I think, but also partially the fact that it was curated, the people who actually got into the space. And it made me want to go in, because I was like, the people who are in here, they've passed some kind of litmus test, as opposed to just Ubud, or I don't know the big space in Chiang Mai, but it's like, do you have $5 or $10, and can you sit down at the desk, and you're talking to somebody who, they could be taking up a lot of your time, and you're making quite a bit of money online. So
yeah, I could definitely see the benefits of that. The only reason why I'm a bit hesitant to want that is it almost kind of feels like, face control at a nightclub, where they want to see, and here's the thing is, if in a place like New York, where there's a lot of different co-working spaces, I think that's fine. Where if you don't like that place, where they don't like you, just don't give them your business, go somewhere else. And if they're kind of just dicks about it, and not, not genuinely being open-minded with interviewing people, or with the application process, people just go somewhere else, and capitalism will just shut them down. But in a place like let's say in Bali, where there's only one space or two spaces for the whole city, and everybody goes there, and either you're accepted or you're not, I think that would be a bad situation, because you don't want people to feel left out or have nowhere to go and not even have a chance to get started, or just even if they just don't like you for whatever reason.
Well, what's happening now in Bali, it's interesting, is there's actually private co-working spaces. There's groups that are sitting on top of some of the co-working spaces that are doing the curating, that pitch almost like you're familiar with Dynamite Circle, but there's groups that are doing like a Project Getaway type 1 month at this co-working space in Bali, but the people that you're working around in the co-working space have been curated to a degree. So that's kind of a middle ground between the two.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. So overall, when you're in Bali, you say you're more in kind of maintenance mode, and
no, I'm working in Bali. Yeah, no, I mean it's Bali's. I mean, no, I'm not in maintenance mode in Bali. It's more. I think the work-life balance in Southeast Asia and Bali is phenomenal, and everything from food super clean. The lifestyle is very healthy. It's fun. There's a bit of grit. It's like you can hire for things that. There's a fascination in the West with like, can I get on-demand food service, or can I get on-demand drivers or whatnot with Uber? And I think if you go to a place like Thailand or Bali, is that like you can hire a driver in Bali, or you can hire someone in the case of Indonesian, they call it a pembantu, which is like a house lady who comes, and she comes over 3 times a week and does food prep and picks up the laundry and whatnot. And every time she comes over, she charges $5 for that. Right. So and you have a relationship with her. She's happy to do it. I mean, I the one that I'm thinking of, her name's Ketut, and she's the sweetest woman. And so it's just different, as opposed to being like, can I plug it into my app on, Yelp or whatnot, and have it delivered to my doorstep? Is like, you don't have any relationship with the person who drops off the food.
Okay. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And I can definitely see that being good for, either busy people, or especially for families if they have kids and they want like I don't want to say like a live-in nanny or maid, yeah, but you can have it if you want.
Yeah, I mean, your quality, it's a lot of what you talk about, like where your quality of life is, your dollar just goes further. And I think there's probably 4 trends. I mean, the dollar is so strong in certain places that it's like, that's one of the trends that's driving people to be nomadic, but also is that the cost of living in the States in a place like San Francisco is abnormally high. It's abnormally high.
Well, the most common question I get whenever I meet someone here in Ukraine, and probably the same in Poland, maybe to a lesser degree, is if you're from California or you're from the US, why are you here?
Because they all want to get to California, right?
Yeah. And I tell them, California is an amazing place. I love it. And I'll probably go back and live there again in the future. But it's from a value perspective. And I think value is a really hard concept to explain to people if they're not really, that's not already their top priority. But even though I can afford to live in California, I feel like I don't get the value for it, just from, $15, lunches and $3,000 rent versus being out here where not only am I not paying California state income tax for not living there, I'm also just, my just cost of living is so much lower that I can follow the rich dad, poor dad model and buy investments instead of liabilities.
Yeah, I think the question for you, like that I come across with that is that I don't know if you wind up lacking some of the brain rub or some of the mentorship that you would get in a place like the Bay Area in California. And I think in your case, it's smart strategically. I don't know if this was part of your strategy initially, but with the podcast and interviewing folks, is it gives you a chance to kind of get some of that rub. But I was in California earlier this year for a conference in San Francisco, and I was there for 3 or 4 days. And it's an awesome place to like tap into and stay mentally sharp and keep some, connections that are in the business world who you're not going to bump into in Chiang Mai or in Ukraine warm, that I would hesitate to say there's no value in going there.
So one of the reasons why I have the podcast is because it forces me to sit down and have kind of deep, interesting conversations every single week. And even in places like Chiang Mai, I do come across, startup founders or people who have, built, or sold $1 million businesses, but a lot of times they're just traveling through. They're there for, vacation, or they're there for a month or two, just kind of, unwind after a big project or after a big launch or big sale. And if it wasn't for the podcast, we might still hang out. We might still go out for a drink or have dinner, but we never really sit down and go deep on, how they did it.
Interesting.
And having the podcast, not only has it connected me to people like you, but also even if we met in person, it would give us an excuse to talk a bit deeper.
It's a good point. It's a good strategy.
Yeah. And, it actually, that's actually honestly how it started. Was I just wanted an excuse to talk to people. And in the beginning, it wasn't, it was, even today, monetizing the podcast isn't a big deal because it's not a big income stream for me. And sometimes, to be honest, I'm busy doing other things, or I just don't feel like going out and looking for a guest that week, or having, going through the process. But I'm so glad I do. It's almost like going to the gym, where you might not want to go, but you're always happy you did
feel
it.
better afterwards. Yeah. Smart.
I love it. So can we talk about just a couple of the things you mentioned in that talk? And we can have a link to that below. It was a YouTube video about the downsides of being a digital nomad, but you also wrote about it in Forbes. Are you a contributor there?
I've written a couple of things that the online edition of Forbes has published. One of them was about the hidden downsides of being a digital nomad. Another one was how to launch your business in Google and actually make it a success. Can talk about that one as well if you're interested in like kind of tactics, more SEO tactics. But yeah, that digital nomad piece was in Forbes.
Okay, you know what? Can we do a real quick synopsis of how to launch your business on Google?
Yeah,
because I think a lot of people are going to want to hear that.
It's a multi-step process, but what the steps look like this is that you first use PPC to find the keywords that are valuable to you. So once you then know what those keywords are, you tend to go, if you have a background in SEO, go look at the properties that rank for those particular keywords. And it's just like going to a nice neighborhood and cruising that neighborhood and looking for the ugliest house in the nice neighborhood, is that if you can buy it and you can fix it, or you can buy it and you can flip that site into something that, like let's say it has a lot of AdSense on it, that you would then rip out those AdSense blocks, plug in your own ads, use those ads to then drive to your landing page or to your money property, and then you control the downstream real estate. So you're using PPC to initially find out what you're willing to pay. You're going to look for properties that might either be, they're not optimized. Specifically, like I love finding sites that are, they're on like old instances of WordPress. Sometimes they're on Front Page, or they're built with Dreamweaver. I mean, there was a lot of hobbyist sites. This was in the genealogy space that I'm thinking of specifically, that had a lot of traffic, and that like you could acquire, fix up, see a really nice bump from doing the fixes, and then you owned the property, and you could use that property to then promote and grow your e-commerce business or your money property.
I love it. So you would just reach out to the owners of that website that, they haven't, it looks like they haven't updated in a while, or they just don't really care about it that much.
Yeah, because you knew what it was worth, basically. Like when you used PPC initially, it was, you had a very good idea of like, okay, this is what it's worth, and the formula would look like, okay, I'm paying this much in PPC, and Google's taking half of it. So let's say it's 50 cents per click. Google's taking half of it. That means if this person is running AdSense, they're getting 25 cents per click. I know that there's roughly this amount of traffic around these keywords. The site tends to rank for, this set of keywords. A lot of times you can get analytics code, either access to the site's analytics, or they'll put analytics code on their website for you, so you can actually get hard numbers. And then what we used to do was we would do contracts first, where we would plug in our own ads or our own search box in place of the AdSense block. And then once we had statistically significant data, and I'm being very deep in the weeds here, but once you had statistically significant data on that particular site, you could make an offer to purchase it, because you knew that instead of paying per month for all these visitors or all these clicks, like if you bought the site, optimized it a little bit, fixed a couple things on it, that it was, number one, is going to rank better, and number two is you had an asset and you didn't need to keep paying for it.
That's very cool. And what would you normally offer them? Like how many, like a 27x monthly profit?
We would buy them outright. We were paying like a lot of times it was like probably like 2 years revenue at their current revenue rate, but it would be a check up front, right? So if you have a site that's making $8,000 a month, and you offer somebody $180,000 for it, it's, for a lot of people, it's hard to turn down. Yeah,
especially if they haven't updated it in a while, and then they moved on to something else.
Yeah,
I love it. What's awesome is that's pretty much what I did with my dropshipping stores. I've been on both sides, where I've sold both my stores now, which oh, thank you. And and it wasn't for a ton of money, but it was about $120,000 total, and it was because it was somebody was like, all right, well, Johnny, you don't really care about your sites anymore. You moved on to doing other things. You seem a bit bored with it. You're not really updating, you're not optimizing, you're not adding more products. I'll give you 27x monthly profits for it. And I said, okay, let's do that. But actually, as
the sales closed, like both parties are happy. You're happy with the exit. They're happy with the sites.
Yeah. And they've done exactly what you do to these stores is they've went in, they've, like for example, one of the sites wasn't even mobile optimized and they just had their web developer go in, and throw on a mobile optimized theme. All of a sudden sales increase. And instead of taking 27 months for them to get back their investment, their goal is to have it paid back after a year and then have an income producing asset after that.
And it's smart for them. It's a good deal in both directions. And I think if you have some cash, or in particular, if you have skills and you understand exactly what you just described right there, that it's foolish not to line up properties like that. Because I think that they're like digital real estate.
Yeah. And that's really smart. I'm really glad that you brought that up, because what I used to do in e-commerce was I would look for stores that were on old like Yahoo store formats and just kind of, outdated, hasn't been updated, but they're still running traffic. So, they're still profitable. But I never thought to buy them out. I would just create a competitor and try to outrank them, but it was difficult to do. It was expensive. I didn't have any of the organic SEO. And now thinking about it, like why not just give them an offer and and just take it over and optimize that store?
Yeah, I mean now that you have some cash, right?
Yeah, I love it. Very good tip. Okay, Thanks. So I'm actually glad we kind of went on that, because I'm sure a lot of people, and this is kind of what I like about the podcast so much, and why we don't have a hard format, is because you never know what low tangents are gonna really give a ton of value.
Yeah, we'll pull on enough threads. One of them turns out to be pretty interesting, huh?
I love it. So I'm curious, like, what actually are the downsides of being a digital nomad, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that one of them is that, and I think this is probably an issue with how being a digital nomad is presented, but I think that there is one of the downsides that is at least not talked about enough is that it takes a tremendous amount of self-discipline to actually make it work. And that there's a perception of, you're going to, as soon as you get on the road, it's all going to be easy. There's probably more things that go wrong when you're actually traveling, whether you suffer from road fatigue, the bed is too hard, you can't sleep well at night, you can't find a co-working space, the internet goes in and out, that just grind you down. And those are I think those are really under discussed or underrepresented. And then you have this issue of what I would call perception and envy, which is, this isn't necessarily the case for you, but if you're a freelancer, or if you're working remotely, which is what a lot of the folks at the Hubu talk, that was the position they were in, is that they straddle this line of, if you are posting pictures on social media of you sitting at the beach with a computer up on your lap, or it's Tuesday at 2:00 and you're on the top of, the Annapurna base camp in Nepal, and you have clients who are expecting work from you, or you have a boss who's looking at you to be like, where is this, or is this deliverable as good as it could be? You really run the risk of putting your income stream at the mercy of somebody else's envy. So you have to walk a very thin line. And that's why a lot of the times, I think in Bali with some of the life coaching stuff, is I dislike it. I dislike the life coaching, because what it is that like they're selling people on a particular, like, this is amazing, oh, why don't you give me money so you can also do this, and I'm going to use the money that you just gave me to keep funding this perception and this dream and telling people how easy it is, right? And I think it's a bit disingenuous. So that's one of the downsides.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. And I never even really thought about the from the freelancer point of view, because I think part of the reason why I wanted to become an entrepreneur is because I didn't want to deal with having a boss looking over my shoulder and asking me what I was doing, because I know that when I work, I'm working hard, but I wanted to be able to do it on my terms. But I can absolutely see that if even if I hired a freelancer and I was paying them a set wage or a salary, and I saw them just mucking about, I would assume either they could have done the work better. They could have done it faster. They could have done more work. But I do think that that's, a big argument on why people should have performance-based pay and not just fixed salaries.
Or be entrepreneurs, right?
Or be an entrepreneur, yeah.
Not be a freelancer. I mean, yeah, but the performance-based, sometimes it's hard. Not everything fits into the performance model. One of the things I think as a freelancer that's incredibly difficult, and you've seen this if you're in Southeast Asia, is that there's a hunger. Like we would hire for CallerSmart, we hired the designer for CallerSmart who did both the website and the app. He was he graduated from one of the top design schools in Thailand. CallerSmart was one of the projects that he worked on in his portfolio. He then used that portfolio to work his way up to a design agency in New York, and now he's actually been hired by LinkedIn, and he's in the Bay Area. And when we hired him in Thailand, so 3-step process there, but when we hired him in Thailand, he was $9 an hour, and his designs were on par 2 years out from being anybody in the Valley who it's like there's the moral of the story is there's like a war on for talent. And if you're a freelancer and you're doing stuff that is easily replicable or stuff that is where you have like clients, I think a lot of times it's like you've got to get out of that deliverable client ecosystem because you're getting chomped at metaphorically from people from lower wage countries or they're hungrier than you.
Yeah, and that definitely makes sense. And but it's also a good thing on our side
to find those people
as entrepreneurs. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, you're right. I mean, that's so good. The other downsides. You're familiar with Gary Vaynerchuk, yeah? Gary V. Yeah. So he talks a lot about
hustle hard.
That the market is the ultimate litmus test. It's not about, like your skin color, your gender, where you come from, XYZ is like the market. If you're not good enough, like the market will tell you. And he has a phrase, or he quoted somebody when he's talking about becoming so good that they can't ignore you. And I think that a lot of times with the folks that I see who are digital nomads is they don't build sustainable momentum. They're not somewhere long enough that they get into habits and routines that make it so that they can become so good that they can't be ignored or so good that they can, win in the marketplace. And so you wind up with, like in your story where, you can quit and go live off savings until you figure it out, when you get to Southeast Asia, or if you want to pre-plan and follow someone else's success, like a lot of what Vaynerchuk talks about or Gary Vee talks about is, I think, becoming so good that they can't ignore you probably before you get on the road. That's not applicable for everybody, but I think to a large degree, like making sure that you have a parachute before you jump out of the plane, which means becoming so good that they can't ignore you, which means you need to have sustainable momentum before you get on the flight to go to, let's call it Southeast Asia or Eastern Europe.
And I think that definitely makes sense. My buddy that I'm traveling with, Chris, he did exactly that, where he pre-planned wanting to be location dependent and being an entrepreneur. So he kept his day job. He worked on his business on the side or on weekends. And by the time he got out here, he already had, more than enough in income to sustain himself and, be able to grow that. And and for the longest time, I would tell people to do exactly that because logically that makes sense. But then people would call me out and say, well, you didn't do that, Johnny. You sold your car and just came out here and you mucked about for 4 years until you figured it out. And looking back, I think even though logically I tell people to build their business on nights and weekends, there's a lot of people like me who just, if we're comfortable, at home, it will just never happen.
Well, yeah, I mean, you were talking about odds, like you forced yourself into that situation to be able to like light the fire underneath you in a sense, right?
Yeah. And, and you're right. Like, some people, that might be the worst thing. They might just burn.
Yeah. I mean, there was, I think playing the odds. I mean, there was, to do what your friend Chris did is it gives you better shot at making it sustainable or making it work over the long term. And you're a success story, and you're probably also an outlier, right? In the grand scheme of things. Would you agree with that, or you think I'm off base saying that?
No, I think you're absolutely correct, and I think that's another reason why I have this podcast. So, that way people can hear the stories of how other people have done it. Because I never want people to just say, okay, well, let me be exactly like Johnny. Let me first, get in the ring and learn Muay Thai, and then let me be a dive master for a few years, and then let me get into e-commerce, because that might not be the path. And that probably isn't the path for most people.
It creates an epic story, huh?
It was fun.
I mean, there was talking about odds and your, let's call it, I don't want to call it your path versus Chris's path because it makes it too personal. But there was a professor from Harvard named Beth Altringer who came to Ubud, the co-working space in Bali, and she was fascinated by the digital nomad movement, and she wanted to get hard data around it. And so she started to give out these surveys they were blind. You could fill them out. You didn't have to give your name. You didn't have to give any identifiable information. But she asked questions like, how much do you have in savings? How much are you earning on a monthly basis? How long have you been on the road? And what she found, I think she collected somewhere over 1,000 of these surveys during the period that she was at Ubud. So she had a pretty good sample size. And what she found from the surveys was that it was basically like 80% of the people were living actually on less than $1,000 a month and going backwards, like in terms of their savings. And really, you could say that their skills were going backwards as well. So the way I phrase it is those probably 80% of them should have been, or at least a portion of that 80% should have been on a vacation as opposed to trying to be nomadic long term. And then the other 20%, what she found was out of the 20%, 10% of that, or half of it, was had in-demand skills already and had already proven themselves. So they had a source of income, or they had they were in the top 1% at a tech firm or something where they were already capable of being remote. And the other half of that 20% bucket was entrepreneurs, was people who own their own business and were making, 4 or 5 figures a month.
Yeah, and I can definitely see those numbers working. And I really liked when you had mentioned just now, but also in your talk, about how a lot of digital nomads should just be tourists, or they should just be on vacation.
Yeah, I mean, you've seen this. Is that because it creates, we're both Americans, but we're in Europe. Is that the Europeans have this nice concept of they take a vacation. Maybe not in Ukraine, not so much in Poland, but Western Europe, they take a vacation. They go August to a large degree. Things shut down in Western Europe. And so I see people that, I'm like, why don't you leave your laptop at home? Because it creates stress of trying to do both, right? You're not really on vacation. You're not really working. And then you're self-shaming along the way because you're in a co-working space, but it's not moving the way you want to, or you have some, you see some people who are like Tuesday at 2:00, they're going to visit the waterfall. You're never probably going to be there and to see that waterfall again, or maybe there's a cute guy or a cute girl and you're interested in them. And so it's like, you're like, well, I should be working, but I'm going to go. And then the scooter breaks down, or you get sidetracked and you want to go try some new food. And by the end of the day, number one, the day is gone. Number two is you were supposed to be working, quote unquote. And number three is that you feel bad about it. You didn't really enjoy it because you were supposed to be working mentally. And yet now you're in this position of, well, you got your laptop with you, so you might as well, plug in at 11 o'clock at night and try to get some work done. And it creates it's a bad balance. Like, just go on vacation, just enjoy it.
Well, I definitely think you're right, where especially if you have, let's say, 2 weeks or a month, whenever someone comes to Chiang Mai or something and they say that they're there for 2 weeks, I'm like, what are you doing? Just go have fun. Just go to the waterfall, go scuba diving, go enjoy yourself. I think the reason why some people, come with their laptops and want to be, take a nomadic vacation is because, they want to feel like they're there for something, that they're not just there to have fun. And for me personally, when I go on vacation, what I like doing, let's say I'm only going to be there somewhere for a week or two. If I just do touristy things, every single day, I get exhausted by the second or third day. And my idea of resting isn't, laying in the hotel and watching TV all day. Is I actually really like sitting in a coffee shop or even a co-working space for a day and blogging or uploading photos or, video editing or doing something that, I'm very fortunate that part of my income is from my blog and my YouTube channel. And not everybody has that,
But those three things that you just named are all creative. Photos, videos, and blogging, those are all creative, right? That touches a part of you. It's not,
and it recharges me.
Yeah, Yeah, I cut you off, but I think that like I'm not advocating that they leave their laptop at home if it's London or SF or whatnot. I mean, you're welcome to bring it and be able to tap in and do the editing or putting the photos online. But it's more just be honest with yourself about if you actually do you want to be doing this long term, right? And if you don't, like look at it as more it's a creative endeavor.
Yeah, and I think, you really hit the nail on the head there when you mentioned creative, because I think the reason why I enjoy do those things is because it's a creative outlet that actually, like recharges me more than it does drain me. But if let's say I was building another e-commerce store and on my third day of being on vacation, I had to upload 100 products or I had to customize some checkout code or something, that would drain me more and I would be more exhausted.
It would pull you out of the vacation too, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, I guess unless, someone is making a living, but, is making a living doing something creative, then they probably shouldn't be at a co-working space. But I mean, I guess there's always something creative you can do. I mean, even, let's say I'm assuming like CallerSmart has a blog or
it has creative elements to it. Yeah,
something
for sure. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. My day to day, like the creative stuff it's fun. It recharges me, like what you're talking about. And the managerial stuff, it tends to suck my energy. One of the things that I had to do, took me a long time to get here, was actually separate out and run totally different email addresses. So a personal email address and then two distinct business email inboxes. And I mean, they're totally separate inboxes. I can't see one from the other because I just needed to be able to separate some of the creative stuff, and both in the business, but also like just writing to friends or I don't know, like what I found was that like a lot of the times, like when I was really out of balance and I felt stressed, it was like, even when I would go into my personal inbox, I would see business stuff in there, and you can't really, you get into this mentality of, oh, you should just not check email at all for 3 or 5 days or 7 days. And it's like, I can't, I mean, I don't want to do that, number one, but number two is I just found it was like, it didn't give me any kind of balance, because when I got back in there after 5 or 7 days, I felt totally overwhelmed, and I was like, I got to get through all this stuff now.
Yeah, and that's actually a great hack. I actually do the same thing. I have my personal Gmail account, and I have, one for Income Boss, and I have one for Johnny FD. And actually on my personal Facebook, whenever someone asks me any business related question, even if it's a friend, I just have them email. I say, oh, can you ask me this in email? And I'll give them that email address. And same thing to WhatsApp or iMessage. And
then it sits there in the business inbox, and when you're in business mode, then you can get to it. Yeah.
Yeah. So great tip.
That's one thing. I mean, actually, I think you probably find this interesting. In my villa in Bali, they're building a second building onto it, and it just finished actually today. And what it is it's an office, and it's again the similar distinction of the same reason you go to a co-working space as opposed to just working from home, is I think you need to have that separation. And some of the people I meet who are like, I'm working from home and I just work from my bed, or I work from this like little table that I have in my bedroom. I'm like, I think it's bad mentally for you. I think you need the break, and you need the separation between the two. It comes back into like vacation versus being a digital nomad. At a high level, I'm like, let's say there's seasons of life, and that it's not natural and not normal to always be in the springtime. Sometimes you have a winter, sometimes you have a summer, sometimes you have a fall, and like whether it's the separation of the email inboxes, whether it's having a separation between where you work and where you sleep, or where you work and where you play, or your day-to-day balance, like it's a big theme. It's one of the reasons actually I'm back in Bali.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And for me, I'm the same way, where I only do work at a co-working space or at a coffee shop outside of the apartment. I've actually never opened my laptop in my bedroom before at the Airbnb I've been staying at. But at the same time, Chris, who I'm traveling with, he's the exact opposite, where he hates co-working spaces. Whenever he goes, he feels unproductive. He feels like it's a waste of his time to even walk there. And he literally loves working from his bed, and he's productive doing that. But at the same time,
different strokes for different folks.
When it comes, but at the same time, he gets burnt out. And then that's why, at 10 or 11 at night, he's like, I have to get out of the house. Let's go to a bar and drink, because I've been here all day.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's so you're in an interesting position because you're going to the co-working space. You come back, you're ready to decompress or be on downtime, and he's ready to go out at that point, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And, I think part of it is kind of just finding what works for you specifically, and it sounds like we're kind of on the same page. I'm curious, like how many months of the year do you normally spend in Bali? How often are you in the US and how often are you in Poland?
I do. I tend to I do 3 to 4 months in each location. And that's actually one of the things that I talked about in the Hubu talk, is just that I think it's so much healthier to get a base, whether it's, for a period of time I lived in Hong Kong, and, that would be the base, and was there for 4 months, and then could from Bali or from Hong Kong go out and have adventures. Have you been to Hong Kong?
No, but my buddy Sam Marks, he loves it there probably for those same reasons.
It's a jump off point, right? You can get amazing airport. Anyways, but having that base, so for 3 to 4 months there, and then being able to hop onto a short flight, and go for 3 or 4 days somewhere, and then come back, I think is to me is the recipe that's worked. And also I do this with some of my closest friends. So I've been fortunate to have entrepreneur friends similar to what you have, where they're interested in the same things. We want to go to the same places. And so it's another way to actually get some of that brain rub, because you have people that are, my friend Chad says, swinging in the same strike zone, and then you wind up, and you live with them. Like in Bali, we had a 3-bedroom house last year down in Chang, and all 3 of the guys, myself included, were entrepreneurs. We all had, sizable businesses, and we could talk about these things. And it also deals with some of the loneliness, I think, is like you have a routine, you're in a space with friends that you're going to see in the future, and you can then go out and explore from that base.
Yeah, and I think on that loneliness factor, I think that's a huge sign of being a huge side effect of being a digital nomad, and being so independent, where it's kind of just normal, where even if you are traveling with a friend and one of you says, oh, I want to go to the beach for a month, and the other one's like, well, I want to go to Hong Kong for a month, and it's almost normal just to, instead of compromising and saying, oh, let's go here first, and then thereafter it's usually like, okay, see ya.
Yep.
And when when you separate, it's fun for a little bit, but it really does not only it gets lonely, but also you get that brain drain where you're not around other people who are building a business or, thinking creatively, and, you're just hanging out with backpackers or people on vacation.
And I think one, in addition to the loneliness and the brain drain, is that it's tiring to constantly retell your story. I don't know if you've suffered from that, but like every time you meet someone new, you're starting from zero, right? And there's a part of this where you're, they're like, so Johnny, who are you? And you're like, I was born in San Francisco, XYZ, like I want, and you start telling the same story over and over again. And there's just fatigue in it, where you're like, I wish, you want to build memories with people that you're going to see a year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now. And it's hard to do. It's hard to do. I think it's a downside.
Yeah, and I used to suffer from that a lot. I think the nice thing is, now that I'm all over the internet, I can just tell people to read my About Me page.
Yeah, and then there you already coming into the call.
Yeah, but what's actually cool about that is I actually don't really like talking about myself. And even if I meet somebody new, I want to hear about them, and I genuinely like hearing about other people's stories. So it's actually nice if they already know mine, so then I can focus on theirs.
Interesting. It's another strategy, huh? Yeah. Clever. I mean, I don't.
There you go.
Have you recruited your friend Sam or Chris? Like, these are guys that you knew from back in Cali or at some point, and you recruited them into either recruited them into being an entrepreneur or recruited them into coming to travel with you?
So Sam, I actually met out in Chiang Mai. He actually happened to live in my building. But Chris, I absolutely recruited him. We've been really good friends back in California since university, so long, 10 plus years. And I was bugging him since, really, even before I actually started making money online. I just said, hey, you should just come out. And he was so, logical and rational. He said, I'm not going to come out until I have a business. And it literally took, I think 2 years after that for me to figure it out. And then I remember the very same month I started making money online with my e-commerce store, I happened to be back in the US, and I said, Chris, you have to do this. And I showed him my store. I showed him, Shopify. I showed him kind of the back end, how it all worked. He spent the next year or two doing it himself. And then once he got his his business at a very kind of high level, that's when he finally came out.
How did you guys handle? I always find this interesting between friends when you're opening the kimono to a friend, and you start talking about business ideas. Did you guys work when he launched his business? Were you guys working together, or was it totally separate? And how did that work? How was that conversation?
So in the beginning, the first e-commerce store that we built together, we did it as a kind of a partnership, but then the product that we were selling was making, let's say, a couple $100 a month, and it just wasn't going viable enough. It wasn't going anywhere, and he decided to just start kind of venturing out and adding. He basically he took our small little idea and he created his own huge business with hundreds of thousands of products. So I really had nothing to do with that big store anymore. So I mean, part of me was kind of like, hey, that would have been nice if you kind of included me with the other one. But at the same time, I also knew grand total I spent 3 or 4 days helping with that, and he spent
2 years,
90 days or a year, 2 years building it himself. So that was completely his.
I think you handled it well. I think you handled it well. I've had friends lose. They've fallen out. I haven't personally experienced this, but I've watched friends fall out over that kind of thing.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. And, I guess you can almost see it from two ways, I think from his point of view, he's like, what are you talking about? You left after 3 days back to Thailand, and I built this company myself. And then from my point of view, if I, was so inclined, I could have been like, well, you never would have thought of this if it wasn't for me.
I showed you the way, right? Here's the path, in a sense.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, I think whoever actually does the work is the one that actually deserves credit or deserves the income.
The executor. Yeah. And plus I think in your case, you get to keep a friend, which is, most important. And number two is now he's with you in Ukraine, right?
Yeah. And because, he built his store and he was able to kind of figure out his parts, we were able to have our separate businesses, but still help each other out.
Man, that's a success story.
Yeah, I love it. And I definitely encourage everyone to try to, either recruit your existing friends, or when you make new friends, really try to travel with them. And that way you're not alone. You're not a solo nomad, that you can kind of have, like-minded people to hang out with, to work with, and to grow with.
Yeah, because that's one of the points that was in the talk about the downsides is that you lack mentorship. You just don't get around. You wind up not finding out, not learning from somebody who that you would like to emulate. Because I think there's a lot to be said for how do I say this? Where you learn from that. I use the analogy this way: is that like if you decide that you want to learn how to shoot baskets, and you find an NBA player who's amazing at shooting baskets, well, you might also find out that he's unfaithful to his wife. His finances are a train wreck. He treats his mom horribly, or whatever other metrics you're measuring that person by. But he's amazing at shooting baskets, and you don't really want him as a mentor, but you want him to learn a particular skill. And so I think that the inability to do that, in your case, you're using the podcast to get some of the brain rub. But like a lot of the times when you're on the road and you're moving around, is you just don't have enough time around the other person to figure out, are they the person that you just want to learn how to shoot baskets from, or are they the person who you want to try to absorb, like a life view or a holistic view of all things in their life? Yeah,
I can definitely see that. It definitely makes sense. And, as far as having mentors kind of on the road, I think it's nice that nowadays we can kind of have a lot of virtual mentorship through listening to podcasts, through listening to audiobooks, through reading books or taking online courses, all things that I do on a regular basis. And I also try to meet people in person, not only while traveling, but, going to conferences, at least a few times a year to really have that immersive experience.
I would love, what conferences are you going to, if you don't mind me asking?
So I'm going to my first Tony Robbins event this year, and, like not really for business, but more for, self-growth and personal development. I have been invited to the Affiliate World conferences a lot, but it really has nothing to do with my business. So even though I like the people and I almost kind of go just for the parties, it's not really the type of, the type of network that helps me with my business. And then I have my conference that I host every year called the Nomad Summit, and that's every year in in January in Chiang Mai.
Cool.
And, not only do I get to host it, but, I'm also an attendee. So I get to meet all the people. I get to learn from all the people and hang out with them as well.
That's the best. When you're the connector, shoot.
Yeah.
Wow, I got to learn from you. This is like, you've done it well. Between the podcast and the conference, I think those are two things I would love to incorporate. That's part of the reason I've started personally to go on the podcast is I enjoy it, and you get to meet some really fascinating folks and having this conversation. But also, when you're the connector and you're the people bringing different people together like you're doing in Chiang Mai, I think it's very powerful.
Yeah, I love it, and I'm so glad to have met you as well. So hopefully we're going to hang out in person soon.
Poland, you could pull it. Poland, if Ukraine is quite far. I'll tell still, but you're coming through Bali, definitely. I would love to hang out. I know we're winding down, but I would just say, as a last plug, did you ever listen to Hardcore History from Dan Carlin?
Yep, big fan of that, and Wrath of Khans was definitely my favorite episode.
Have you listened to his Ghosts of the Ostfront?
No, I haven't heard that yet.
It takes place in Ukraine. It's about the Nazi invasion of Russia.
Wow. Okay. Right.
Terrific.
Well, I'll get that on that now.
Odessa and Kiev, and it's pretty fascinating. So if you got some downtime, you're chopping vegetables or whatnot.
Yeah, Hardcore History I think is a great podcast to listen to on plane rides or long train rides where you have a few hours, you just want to get immersed in something.
Yeah, zone out.
Yeah, I love it. So if people want to reach out to you, Brian, how can they find you?
Yeah, so, I don't know. My personal website is briandavidcrane.com. You can email me, Brian at CallerSmart, or I'm on Twitter. My handle's Brian David Crane. And the reason I go by my full name on all of these places is coming from the South in the U.S. is that they had the hardest time spelling my name. It used to be Brian instead of Brian, and it got misspelled as brain, and it was... Growing up, I was called Brain Crane all the time. So,
oh, that's funny. That's actually a good name, though. I like it.
I didn't. So, so from one person who goes by, most of my friends call me BDC, but like from you got Johnny FD and BDC. It's a bunch of of initials bouncing around.
We'll call you BDC. I like that.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much for being on the show. And if you guys want to check out his app, it's CallerSmart.com. And thanks again. See you guys all next week. Bye-bye. All right. Hey, everyone. Thanks so much for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I want to thank everyone who's taken the time to leave these amazing 5-star reviews of the podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to the show. You guys are the reason why I continue to get these great guests. And today's guest was really, really inspiring. BDC, big shout out to you. Also, big thank you to our sponsor, TripStreak. The next time you guys need to book a flight out to Poland, out to Bali, or out to Ukraine, wherever you want to book a flight, you want to do it on your terms with your options, go to tripstreak.com/travel like a boss. I'll see all of you next week. Stay bossy. Thank you for listening to the Travel Like a Boss podcast. If you want to hear more, including the bonus How to Choose the Perfect Niche episode, join our mailing list at travellikeabosspodcast.com. See you next week, and remember, if you want to travel like a boss, you need to be your own boss. So start your online business today and start living the lifestyle you've always dreamed of.